Hello, everyone. There we go. That's better. All right. Set this thing up. All right, we're starting a little bit early, so we're probably going to take some time getting into it, just while people sort of filter in. But hello, everybody. Yes, I am still doing the stream with Professor Flowers tomorrow morning PST at 11 a.m. That is absolutely still happening. Actually, why I'm covering this is rather interesting. So, yesterday, Professor Flowers reached out to me on Twitter and asked, in advance of our conversation, whether I was intending to have like a normal back and forth conversation, or whether I was. Oh, am I muted? I shouldn't be muted. No, it says the audio is happening on my end. Let me see here. No, I'm not muted, Tom.com. That's you. But that terrified me because historically I have had audio trouble, so that makes sense. But I'm not muted. We're not watching the video yet. But yeah, as I was saying, Professor Flowers reached out to me yesterday afternoon because she wanted to make sure that she wasn't going to be baited into a debate about something like Indigenous, land return or something like that. Yeah, I know I'm not muted, said thank you. You can hear now. Could you not hear before? Anyways, I'm going to ignore you weirdos. Yeah, so... And the impetus for that was apparently a conversation in which she went on stream with somebody. They said, usual stuff. Just want to get your opinions on such and such. And that ended up being a brutal debate on whether or not Indigenous people have a right to, colonize Indigenous people, the right to their territory, right to take back their territory. I apologize if you hear some beeping. That's my, there's something going on with my washer dryer. I think the sensors has a loose connection and it's detecting that it can't tell the temperature, so it's like going crazy. So we had an hour-long conversation afterwards on Discord, which went very well. She's a very, very easy to speak to person. I'm looking forward to our conversation tomorrow. But then I saw this morning that this exchange... Was this morning? I saw today that this exchange got published. Professor Flowers' conversation ends abruptly after Vosh debate. Now, I don't know what this means exactly after Vosh debate. I know that this exchange took place after the Vosh debate, obviously. But I take this stream to be the one she was referring to. I haven't received any confirmation from her that this is the one, but we're going to be going over it because I think it'll be interesting and sort of apropos considering I'm going to be talking to her tomorrow. And we won't be debating this stuff at all when we do talk tomorrow, but I think the Vosh conversation might come up at some point, and this would be sort of helpful. I've been listening through the Vosh conversation a few times over the last couple of days because it interested me. My general impression is that, and I know people have pushed back on this reading, but my honest impression is that she was primarily concerned not with valorizing or allowing genocide or bigotry on behalf of colonized people. My general impression was that she was concerned with demonization of people who end up having a bigoted attitude towards people of a perceived oppressor group, when indeed there is actually like a concrete history there giving rise to it. There's a distinction between a culture in a black family to be mistrustful of white people because of actual abuses and prejudice within a community, versus the prejudice of a white family towards black people because of pure spite and disdain, right? Without that historical backdrop. And it interested me that, among other things, while Vosh would bring the conversation back to morality, I don't think the word moral actually ever escaped her lips throughout that conversation. Which told me a few things. First of all, that she wasn't talking about practicality. She was concerned with how do we construe these different things? Like, how do we talk about them? And she even outright says, like, no, actually, I think there are, just because you're going through a process of decolonization. That doesn't mean you can just do anything. She does actually condemn genocidal activity in the context of that conversation. So I think it's unfair to characterize her as being pro-genocide or even enabling it. For two reasons. First of all, because I don't think it's in her power to enable it. And secondly, because I don't think she actually did. I do think she made some serious miscalculations in her presentation. And we'll maybe parse those out a bit tomorrow, hopefully. But my honest impression of the person is that this isn't a bad actor. I think she probably made some misjudgments in how she approached Vosh in particular. And I think she needs to iron out some things in her presentation that give a misleading impression of her actual positions and the general thrust of her argumentation. And I also think, by the way, lest anyone think in light of my recent Doomer Politics response videos that I am a Vosh stand of any kind. I think Vosh did a fairly bad job in that conversation. I think he spent too much time trying to hammer Professor Flowers and not enough time, especially given his immensely larger stature by comparison. He wasn't giving her much room to actually calm down and develop the arguments that she wanted to bring forth in such a way that they could be taken up productively. Near the end of the conversation, it actually got really good, but especially early on, there was we'll go into that tomorrow, but at the moment we're looking at this. So I expected DrHeemedOut to be much larger than this. DrHeemedOut is actually not much bigger than me on YouTube. I think he's got 4K subscribers on Twitch. He's a scientist of some kind. I'm not that familiar with his stuff. But he had a conversation with Professor Flowers. It's the one we were just talking about. So we're going to go through this. And depending on how long that takes, we might switch gears afterwards and actually just get started on our Halloween horror marathon early and start playing some Amnesia. We'll see how tired I am. But what time is it now? 6:24. We have about 6 more minutes to kill before it's 6:30. It's okay for a bus to arrive late. It is unforgivable for a bus to arrive early. So we're not going to start until that time comes. I also realized that I scheduled this right while there's a hippy-dippy thing going on and Vosh is on it, so we are going to have a small audience tonight, which is fine. I didn't start a political science channel because I'm trying to compete with PewDiePie. That said, that brief period of 50 audience members, that was surreal. Sounds pathetic, like such a small amount, but for me it's huge. So I'm Vosh bad? No, I actually kind of like... I like Vosh as a person, to be honest. I think the problem, though... And this came up in conversation last night when I was talking to Professor Flowers. I don't actually have her permission to talk about that, so I'm not going to go into anything that she said. But I brought up that I think actually on a personal level, I think Vosh is actually a fairly decent guy. I think what happens, though, is that in context... he is aware of his ability to use his scale and his charisma and his he has a he's good at what he does, at his delivery and at keeping cool and keeping in control in a debate, especially given that he is literally in control. He has all the buttons. If he, for whatever reason, determines that it is advantageous or acceptable to use these things to batter down an interlocutor, he'll do it. And I mean, Professor Flowers came on in an antagonistic mode, right? This was in response to her own fairly intense critiques of Vosh, and she came on intending to fight him, and she was clear about that to me. So, it's not exactly incumbent on him to be generous in that case. I still wish he had been, because it's why... Given that it costs you nothing in the long run, why not just, make things a little better. But anyways. Let's look at the chat. Vosh has repeatedly defended the use of child porn and even lowering the age of consent within socialism. I haven't seen that. I have seen him make some statement to the effect, and I'm going to have to... There are 2 points that come up. One is spurious and one is a little bit less so and a little bit more yikesy, but I'm unclear on both of them. So the first one, of course, is the comparison of I think like purchasing a computer made by a child slave labor to the ownership of child pornography. And for some reason, this is taken as an argument that, well, we purchase computers, therefore we should be allowed to, deal in child pornography. But I think the point was that we don't deal in child pornography. Why are we suddenly okay with it when it's just child slavery? Like, we should be condemning that thing as well as this thing, not the reverse. The other one was something like under socialism or under some future condition when we've like gotten rid of power imbalances or whatever, we can review our positions on like current mores around what the appropriate age of consent is and stuff like that. Like yeah, I find that one kind of weird. I'll have to like look at the original quote again. I think if we're talking like like gaps of like 3 or 4 years between teens where it's across the threshold, like I'm still iffy, but like you can kind of see where he's going there. If he's talking like adults and kids, then no. That's a nay rolls for me there. Argent Templar had a really stupid video recently. He's a reactionary guy who does he got onto my radar because he does politics and anime videos. But he had a really stupid video about age of consent, which is like baffling to me, especially given the focus on language around consent and things like that in left circles. Like that's critical. The fact that you have a statutory what's the actual term? The fact that they're kids, I think, is fair enough as a distinguishing feature of that case. He had that second position, but he kind of reversed it. Okay, well, good if it is the worse interpretation of that, but he's literally argued for raising the age of consent. Okay, I'm sure he's probably like I think Vosh on one level is a fairly smart guy. I think on another, especially like maybe in the recent past, he's also kind of an idiot and he runs his mouth a lot and he's probably said a bunch of stuff that he probably if questioned on would walk back, especially given the fact that he's willing to walk back stuff sometimes that he even shouldn't. So it's really hard to say with stuff like this. But I would say that I don't think saying that Vosh has repeatedly defended the use of child porn, I don't think that's fair. Did you challenge my NAP? What? I don't know what that means. Anyways, all right, 6:30, so we can get going. Welcome everybody who came in on time. I was going to say late, but I started early. So we're looking at Professor Flower's conversation with DrHeemedOut's, who I think is actually a doctor. He is at least avowedly a scientist. I don't know of what kind. I low-key kind of hate scientists, not because I hate science or people who do science, but because in my experience, people from STEM who try to weigh into political issues tend to have a vastly inflated sense of their competence, and it's really frustrating to deal with. But, yeah, the optics were terrible. I agree. General rule of thumb, don't compare child porn to things. Just don't bring up child porn if possible. I don't even know why we're talking about it right now. Well, we're talking about it because of you, Gordoz, and it's your fault. Anyways, as I was saying, Professor Flowers walked out of this conversation. She mentioned this to me last night in conversation, which is why this is interesting to me. We're going to go through it, and we're going to see what's up. Cool? What? Why is this person deleted? Oh, I see. Alright, well, let's roll.
Yeah, so I'm an immigrant, right? When I hear like that indigenous people should have self-determination of their land, this used to be their land, I feel as though I'm not welcomed here. Why can't we just help to address the current systemic issues without saying...
How is the audio, by the way? Can you hear that? Is that good? Maybe I should turn down the latency. I guess I can't now. Oh, technology, I hate it. Audio's good? Okay.
that like, oh no, this is our land, kind of.
Well, it's not your land.
Why though?
So
Why,
it's like,
but like, why can't it? Why
because it's never stopped being stolen. And I think it's just kind of as simple as that.
I just don't think the dichotomy of colonizer and colonized applies to today's analysis of the world. And I remember back when I was growing up that darker skinned black people would kind of shit talk lighter skinned black people. Do you see how like once you like start thinking about the intricacies and the possible
Once I start thinking about the intricacies.
Not you. I mean like once
like I've never
no,
thought
no,
about,
sorry.
like, okay.
I didn't mean you.
I'm sorry.
No?
I don't want to have this conversation, though. I'm sorry that it's like abrupt, and
okay.
I just feel like really frustrated, and like
Totally.
I'm just not interested in arguing.
Okay.
That was a weird selection of opening clips. I don't know why it went black and white near the end. But this is going to be a shit show, isn't it? That's the sense I'm getting. Yeah, there's going to be some slight background noise, unfortunately. I haven't worked out that quirk yet.
Welcome, Professor Flowers. How are you doing today?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I was really looking forward to having this chat with you, and
I will be talking to Professor Flowers myself. I'll be doing that tomorrow, actually. Tomorrow morning at 11 a.m.
Glad you were able to make it. Everything good with you? How's it been since you chatted with Vosh? I'm curious.
It was really hard the first few days because there was like this clip that went viral. That was probably the clip that was going around. But when I first saw that clip, like everyone on it was saying that was genocidal, and that was really overwhelming because I'd never, I'm still a smaller channel, I've never had like that many eyes on me, so it was just overwhelming that many people were like, you're a genocidal separatist, and so that was overwhelming. But then like it got better because like the clip also went viral where people were like, this is bullshit,
right?
So it kind of like it kind of evened out a little bit, and then it hasn't been too bad in the past like couple weeks. Like I've tweeted about Vosh like a little bit, but I haven't been dogpiled yet. It kind of, in some sense, got shut down. I think I have this theory that like I think like some part of like Black Twitter actually saw the debate and were like really angered by it, and kind of just shut down a lot of the debate bros.
I think a lot of it is, I've had similar situations before where I've been like dogpiled, I guess you could say, as well, or your name is like in the public eye for a bit. But I think people just have such short attention spans that they move on quickly, and you're just left to deal with like you end up caring more about it, obviously, which makes sense. It's happening to you. But yeah, I think in a way it's good that people have such short memories or attention spans that they just move on to the next thing. So I'm glad that it isn't continuing. Did you get any like new supporters out of it too?
Yeah, it's really weird. There are some Vosh fans who were like, I like both of you, I'm gonna subscribe, and that was really strange. Obviously most Vosh fans were not thinking that. And then I had a bunch of Black people reach out to me and talk to me about this situation, and then I've grown in subs.
She actually did something really cool, and she went on her Patreon and put a notice saying that if you're from Vosh's community and you're like, you're accepting of his rhetoric, and I'm in somewhat of agreement with her in terms of her characterization of it, not because I think his positions were wrong per se, but because I think he was pushing her on a thing that wasn't actually representative of her stance, and I think that was bad. But she put a notice up saying, if you support this stuff, don't pay me, which is really cool. Frankly, like whatever else you may think of what she says, that takes to literally say don't give me money for this for free. That takes integrity. I appreciate that.
Strangely from this.
That's good. Like I think it's important to be able to, I like that some Vosh fans were able to say I like both of you. I think it's good to be able to like appreciate different people's perspectives, even though you might in any situation agree with one of them over the other one. I think that's good to hear different voices.
My issue is that Vosh was literally arguing the fear of retribution, which is like this like classically racist argument where it's like, well, we can't give people back their full autonomy because they might pull a genocide or da 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 da. And it's yeah, it's just like this very like classically racist argument. And so it's like if that's not a red flag to someone who's listening, then I don't want them to be a part of my community.
Gotcha.
I want them to stay really far away from me because I'm trying to talk about anti-colonialist rhetoric. I'm trying to talk about like anti-racism, and we need to kind of like, I want to build a community where we can talk about these things. And yeah, I don't necessarily want those people subscribing to me, even though I understand they're trying to be supportive. I'd rather.
Really? Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
You're holding your
I'm
ground.
making a follow-up video, and I'm gonna mention that I understand they're trying to be nice, but it's not the place for them.
Gotcha. So I want to get into the the discussion. Personally, I'll tell you, I guess, my perspective. I'm not very like well read or anything. I know one of your issues with Vosh in general. I just actually rewatched all your videos on the criticism of Debate Bros and Vosh in general. I think one problem you seem to have was that they don't that he came off as like an authority on the matter, and that you wish that like he would give more of a voice to Black creators to speak on these issues. Is that right?
Say that's one. It's also like understanding like what's your place to talk about these things. Like your place, especially as a white person, to talk about racism is only as important as it represents the voices of oppressed people. And if you're not checking in with those communities going like, did I get this right? Am I representing you correctly? Then you need to stop talking.
I see. Okay, so I'm coming here with my hands up, and I'm here to hear from you and kind of hear your perspective on these things. Do you have like a specific background on this or anything, or is it just something that you're passionate about?
I don't have a specific background on like I talked about Black nationalism, I talked about separatism. In the debate, we ended up talking about decolonization. Funny enough, my videos about Vosh were just to say that, listen, people don't really understand these ideas. People don't really understand separatism. People don't really understand Black nationalism, and they're being misrepresented. So try to understand these things before having an opinion. And that's actually as far as I intended to go on the matter. And then it turned into this.
Gotcha. Okay, so I guess we can jump into it if you want. Like, how long have you been making content for? I'm just kind of curious to get to know you a little bit before I jump into the arguments. Like, I like to do like a little interview, get to see where your perspective is from, and then see if we disagree on anything or what we can talk, like get into the teeth of it, I guess.
Yeah, I think I've been making videos for maybe a couple of years. I'm not sure. Like, I started making videos kind of because I was taking this class, and I made a video for a class I was in, and I posted on here. And then I kind of like, casually like posted a video every now and then. And then I think I started to really take it seriously maybe a little more than a year ago, where I started where I'm like, I'm just gonna really focus on YouTube. Yeah.
Nice. Are you liking it? I guess besides the negative, I feel like it's a good way to vent your frustrations and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think for me, video essays are a form of self-expression, and like I'm also a musician, and this might sound silly, but I think it feels like I'm expressing myself in a very similar way that I do through music. So it's been very like transformative. I feel like every video that I make, or the ones that I spend like a few months making, I feel like I am a different person by the end of it. And
That's
so
awesome.
I have really appreciated that.
Nice. So in the making of the video, you're kind of growing as well along with the video. Interesting.
Totally.
Okay, so let's get into the first thing, which is what is your opinion in general on like debate spheres, I guess? Because like, yeah, I'll ask you first. Like, what do you think of like debates in general? I guess a lot of people seem to hate them. Do you fall into that camp?
Well, I find them very entertaining. I think it's very satisfying seeing people who are Nazis who are just like getting owned because Nazis are very frustrating. And I haven't really seen formal debates, so I kind of will withhold my opinions on that.
Yeah, I mean like the internet debates. I'm right. I get you.
But for internet debates, I think there is an issue of misinformation being spread. Like, I think especially like if it's like leftists debating leftists, then it's like, in my example with Vosh, like I regret debating him, not because I regret anything that I said, but because his audience knew very little on separatism, knew very little on anti-colonialism, had little interest in it. And after the debate, they knew just as little, and then came away with these misrepresentations of these things for the purpose of winning a debate. And so the misinformation that's spread is damage that can't be undone.
Gotcha.
So that's where I stand on it now.
I think she's right to a certain extent. My issue with this critique of Vosh here again is that she went into the conversation having already fielded some personal critiques of Vosh himself. So it's like, if you didn't want an agonistic interaction in which one side has to win, that wasn't the way to frame that conversation. I think I wouldn't say necessarily that the conversation itself was a mistake, but I think approaching it in that agonistic fashion was a miscalculation, primarily because she should know that she can't hurt him, right? Because the trick is that with Vosh's repertoire of interactions, and a lot of them are fully justified, he has at his disposal a history of previous interactions that he can refer to characterize a current discussion. So if he characterizes Professor Flowers, and she is as like, say, this is just like my interaction with, I don't know, Nick Fuentes. Has he ever talked to Nick Fuentes? This is just like my interaction with Nick Fuentes. And she says something that can be construed as something superficially similar to what Nick Fuentes says, or substantively, like that's a possibility. Then she's done, because the audience is they have that internalized. They know what that means. And what it means is she loses, just like that person does, because it's these moments that sort of, recreate themselves. And that's like, it's a different rhetorical game for Vosh than for her. She's something new. She has to create herself on stage, as it were. Vosh doesn't have to do that. Vosh is able to just, reify past encounters.
Gotcha. I do definitely agree that, especially like so I'm a scientist, and COVID is really big thing for me, debunking COVID misinformation and stuff. And like, for the same reason you're explaining, I'm hesitant. I don't really like doing COVID debates, although I have done a few, but it just kind of bothers me how easily you can spread misinformation. So I definitely can see where you're coming from on that. So like, do you think that if you're, I remember I was watching back and you were saying that like, it's not, you were kind of comparing like leftist movement on one hand and then like debating Nazis on the other hand. Do you like think that this is a dichotomy that exists in general? Because I feel like you can do both at the same time.
I think you can do both at the same time. And I don't think debating Nazis necessarily has to be bad, but I think there's a lot of walls that you come into inevitably, where it's like, is it your place to be debate, like, especially like as a white person, like, is it your place to be debating the validity of Black people or the validity of trans people, where it's like, there's things that I've seen that come up in debates where it just kind of seems like it's not this person's place, or it seems like there should be a trans person saying this or a Black person saying this. So I think there's just like these issues that come up with it. But I don't think that they have to be. But I do think that the way that I don't think they have to be a dichotomy, but I think the way that it's happening now is abhorrent. Like, someone said that, who needs COINTELPRO when you have debate bros? The way that like the hostility that's been cultivated. Like, I made those 2 videos about Bosch and was like, this person's rhetoric and content is making this place hostile for any Black person who agrees with Bosch. There's a lot of Black people who disagree with Bosch, and there's a lot of Black leftists who disagree with Bosch. And whenever we disagree with him, we're painted as Nazis. And I said that before the debate. And then after the debate, I was literally painted. Yeah, I was compared to my thoughts were compared to the Holocaust. And I'm like, well, this is an issue because Black people are trying to talk about these issues, and we can't talk about them without being called, a Nazi or
Gotcha.
a segregationist or da-da-da-da.
Do you think that okay, we can go in a few different directions here. So first I want to ask you, like, do you think that, so you think that, like, let's say I'm Middle Eastern, okay? I don't identify as white or Black, but I feel like I can speak on what it feels like to be a POC minority, and so on and so forth. And I definitely have done like research onto, the systemic racism that Black people feel in North America and many other places. So do you think that like I shouldn't talk about these things, or I guess like how should I go about it? These are things I'm passionate about. Or even let's say another one is like abortion, right? I think that a woman should have the right to choose. I'm very passionate about that. Do you think that I should avoid talking about these things because I don't fall into that category?
Okay, so there's 2 things I want to focus on here. First of all, like, see her body language and her expression. I think she's extremely nervous. But the main thing is, like, if that initial sentence rubbed you the wrong way, I can understand why it would. Like, this language about maybe you're not the person who should be talking about this issue, what have you. Like, there's something of like standpoint epistemological, tomfoolery going on there. I think the upshot of that isn't that if you are not black, you can't talk about these issues. I think the argument is if a if a structural part of your position implicates the experience of a group to which you don't belong, then you probably shouldn't be airing that as if it has, like, you know, some degree of certainty about it. Like, for example, if I try to make an argument to the effect of, well, let's compare the badness of being in slavery, say, to the badness resulting from the chaos that took place in the early parts of the Haitian Revolution. I don't have access to, I mean, even like in the time period in which we're talking about, I don't have access to the experience of the enslaved party such that that's information that's even accessible to me. So when I'm weighing these two things together, I'm not actually doing that. And I think that's kind of where Flowers is going with this. I don't think she's saying that white people can't have an opinion or take part in discussions around these issues. I think what she's saying is that if you are trying to put the experience of different groups into the scales, you'd better be keeping your finger pretty close to the pulse of what the people who actually have that identity are saying when you're, you know, evaluating those different experiences. Because if you're not doing that, then you're making that experience up. Does that make sense? Like, so for example, when he's bringing in the abortion thing, he says, like, well, I'm very passionate about, like, my pro-choice stance. I think that women should have the right to choose their bodies, yada yada yada. As a man, should I not be able, or as a cis man rather, should I not be able to comment on that? And I don't think she's going to say that he can't. I think she's going to say something like, well, I mean, insofar as his stance is pro-choice, like, you're referring the decision entirely to the woman anyway, so, you know, whatever. But I think what she would say, and she'll probably, hopefully, develop that as this goes on, just judging from how she's using the thing before, I think what she would probably say is that, like, sure, but insofar, again, as you're, like, let's say you're anti-pro-choice, and you say, well, the pain of pregnancy isn't as bad as what have you, or the inconvenience of pregnancy, even if you want to tone it down a bit. Like, a cis man just doesn't have that information. That's not a thing you can actually weigh in on. So when you put that experience into the equation from that vantage, and you're not conferring with the parties that this actually affects, that's made up. That makes your argument, in effect, inherently dishonest. Does that make sense?
I don't think that's not actually necessarily what I'm saying. I think that there's like the way that I'm looking at it is like there's your experience that you've had, so you can speak directly to your experience, and then there's the experiences of others. So like let's talk about like abortion, where it's like that might not be something that you're going to you know, ever have to like face personally yourself as far as your own body, but you still obviously have strong thoughts about that. And so my point is that when we're talking about these experiences that we're passionate about but aren't necessarily our experience, my point isn't to say that we can't talk about them, but to listen first and foremost to the people who are going through those experiences and check in with them and be like, hey, these are my thoughts on this. Do I have this right? And obviously you're going to get a whole lot of different feedback from people, but I think there's a due diligence in trying to really represent this group and make sure that you are representing them. If you're going to try to represent someone, make sure that you're doing your best to not misrepresent them.
This is a perfectly respectable position. So yeah, she's taking exactly the tack that I thought she would. Yeah, this is perfectly respectable. And the conversation is cordial, so I'm curious as to how she's going to get motivated to leave early.
So
is the point that I'm getting at.
So I agree with you, but the problem is a lot of these issues, like I could find you women who think abortion should not be legal, and I can find you women who think abortion should be legal. So it's not like on issues where everyone agrees, like I don't know. I'm sure I would be hard pressed to find a black person who thinks slavery should be allowed, right? So on that issue, then yeah, because everyone is going to be in agreement. But a lot of issues, there's a lot of, you can find people on both sides who will take that position, right? So how do you like
Yeah.
reconcile with that?
Well, I think what you do is obviously you're going to have like somewhat of a bias. Like you're like, well, I am going to probably be siding with the people who think that abortion should be legal and so on. But for me, it's not that you have to like represent every single person's individual idea. It's more the understanding that you need to talk to as many people as possible to build your understanding of something. So like when women are saying that like I think abortion's wrong and da 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 da, I think if you're having representation of anti-abortion, be like, it's good to acknowledge like there are people who think that abortion is wrong for these reasons, and here are the, you might have a bias towards people who think that abortion should be legal, but you can still say like, here are these reasons that I agree with of like why abortion is should be legal, why everyone should have a right to access to abortion, and here's some of the points of what they're saying. Like my point is that you can talk with people, and even though there's a bunch of different viewpoints, doesn't mean that you have to agree with everybody, but you should have these different viewpoints inform your understanding.
Gotcha. So I guess like, let's say for abortion, right? Like maybe what you're saying is before I weigh in on it, I should have some women on to, let's say one that has had an experience with abortion, one that maybe wanted to get an abortion but was restricted, something like this.
Yeah, like before you have an opinion on something, try to find people like something that before you have an opinion on something that doesn't necessarily have to do directly with you or isn't directly your experience. Try to learn about that experience from other people where that is their experience.
Gotcha.
Is kind of as far as I'm trying to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, like I don't know what kind of, like, have you ever, I assume you haven't seen my content before when I don't know if you've done any research on me or whatever, but I like to have like discussions. I consider myself a discussion bro. I like to hear you out, whatever, but like if I have disagreements with you, I'm gonna push back in the nicest way possible. I don't know if you done any, did you check out any of my content or anything like that?
I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Actually.
That's okay.
I just kind of came on.
Awesome. No, that's okay. Okay. So, what is your goal, I guess, as a content creator? These are just some questions I had written down after listening to your videos, so I'm curious.
I think my ultimate goal as a content creator is actually just self-expression, like talking about things that I think like are really important to me, or yeah, and trying to express like why I think these things are important, or like why I believe eyes should be on this thing. And that's my ultimate goal. It's not necessarily like activism or things like that. Even though I think activism is really important.
Gotcha. Yeah, because like I agree with you, because like a lot of your criticism towards like leftist content creators seem to be that like, how are we gonna have a leftist movement when you guys are being petty or when you're being toxic, things of this nature. But I feel like there's twofold. So first of all, I think like, I'm not sure what you mean by leftist movement, I guess. And second of all, would you consider growing your platform, getting more eyes on your content, getting more eyes on your leftist perspective? Would that be considered a part of the movement, or are you looking for something more than that?
It can be considered a part of the leftist movement, but I think there's this kind of like, people really believe that YouTube is the leftist movement, and that's inaccurate to me. And so for me, it's not, YouTube is certainly part of that, but I think people don't understand the scope or the limitations of that scope. And when I say like leftist movement, I really just mean like promoting leftism. And to me, I think that's very different for other people, because I think a lot of people's leftism ends at like wanting healthcare. But I think for me, that's listening to the voices of Indigenous people, it's ending white supremacy, it's listening to colonized and enslaved people, it's creating a truly equitable society, ending all these systemic oppressions around disability, transphobia, racism.
So you think that if, let's say, I'm not personally, I don't consider myself a leftist. I'm like a SOCDEM. I'm not like a pro-socialism or whatever. I just like policies that help limit suffering. But I'm a progressive, socially I'm pro-LGBTQ, I'm pro everything, right? So I guess my question is, do you think that if there is someone who's a leftist who has this platform, that like, let's say someone's a leftist just for entertainment purposes, just for introducing these ideas to people, do you think that's like, I don't know, weak shit?
Writer. And there's this like tweet that he has where he's saying like, I'm not going to go to Black Lives Matter protest.
Did Xanderhall used to be an alt-writer? I can believe it, he's dumb enough. Oh. Oh dear. We are losing a connection, aren't we? Are we back on? Did the stream die? Oh, okay, we're back. Did we lose the stream there for a second? What the hell is wrong with YouTube right now? Oh my god. This guy is a centrist, and I like that he knows social democracy is centrist. I deny the existence of the center as an actual point. There are only extremes in politics. There's because think of what the center implies. Like we're not talking about like like a centrist isn't like half fascist, half socialist. A centrist is someone who treats both of these as essential fixtures of the political landscape and characterizes themselves as the mean between them, which is of course something polar opposite to each of these, which regards their opposite as in some sense facile or incorrect, not like extreme, but wrong. Stream died for a second. How long did we lose? Oh, this is so tiresome. Anyway, see, what we got from this is DrHeemed is an enlightened centrist or something. That's about it. You didn't miss much.
That's because I'm streaming and that's way more important. And it's just like, you know, like this person kind of thinks he's more important than I think he actually is. And so that's
Still catching up with this lady is incredibly racist. What the fuck? How is she incredibly racist? I haven't seen that. I actually haven't seen that at all. That was actually one of the most frustrating things about the Vosh conversation, is that she didn't actually say anything that was racist. I think she got caught up because there were two things going on in that debate. Vosh was concerned with whether or not bigotry in the minds of an oppressed group is bad in the sense of something you condemn them for. And she was concerned with that to an extent. Hang on, let me wind that back a little bit. No, sorry. He was concerned with whether or not bigotry itself was bad simpliciter. She was concerned with whether or not bigotry in the mind of an oppressed person for whom there is an actual, like, real thing that triggered that is not their fault, whether that makes them condemnable. And she was arguing that it doesn't, of course, which I think is fair. And then he was interpreting that as, well, she's valorizing bigotry by black people, which was not what her point was. In fact, near the end of that conversation, she quite explicitly condemned genocidal activity. So I don't think people watch that all the way through. She has a hard time presenting her points optically. Yeah, she does. I agree. I think she's actually a very decent person. I think as a consequence of probably the political culture that she swims in, like, sort of, I don't think she's a debate person. In fact, if you watch her, like, her real talk, especially the one on, I can't remember what it's called, but like BreadTube Can't Talk About Race or something like that. It's very good and very lucid, but I think in real time, I think she gets flustered fairly easily. And I think she probably came to the Vosh conversation with the wrong attitude. But I've watched that now a couple times over, and I would not characterize her as racist at all. I can understand why people misunderstood her that way. Like, her presentation left something to be desired. She needed to really tighten the bolts on how she said what she was saying, but I don't think she's a racist at all. I don't even think she's a poor speaker. It's just a lot of pressure to take on Vosh's. Oh, I don't think she's a poor speaker at all. She's an excellent speaker. Very good. In fact, if you look at her video essays, I'm pointing this way because my camera's reversed. When you look at her video essays, they're very lucid, very well spoken, very clear, very good. I highly recommend her stuff. But in debate, especially on stuff like this, I don't think she... And it's not to say that she can't, but it's like, it's a separate skill, right? It's not just about speaking clearly. You're wrangling somebody in real time. It's actually really hard. What attitude are you approaching your conversation with her Sunday? I'm just talking to her. I just want to just, you know, get her thoughts on how those conversations went. Like, talk about, like, translation and stuff like that. I want to talk to her actually about stuff that she has some specific knowledge in. So, like, the CRT stuff would be really interesting. That'd be helpful for me. But yeah, tomorrow's just going to be a conversation. I have zero intention of pinning her on anything. How is it racist to acknowledge that oppressed groups have a hatred for their oppressors? It's inevitable. I think the crucial point is that I think Vosh was interpreting that, because if memory serves, she said something to the effect of, it's okay for black people to have negative impressions or attitudes towards groups that are historically or even in a concurrent or a current sense an oppressor group. And I don't think she was saying that them having that is a good thing, but I think Vosh was interpreting that as being like, this is a healthy thing for them to have, according to you, because it's like, you know, the oppressed oppressor dynamic valorizes one side and demonizes the other one, and you just are the flip side of the white nationalist. But that's not what she was saying. She was saying that, this is my paraphrase of it, they aren't bad people for that. There's a reason for this happening. The difference is that a white nationalist who has the mirror attitude towards a black person does so out of arrogance and spite, when they haven't actually been wronged by that group. So, but yeah, that was frustrating. I don't think Vosh was fair to her. I don't think it's Vosh's fault that he wasn't fair to her. I don't think in the moment he really had the ability to be. I think that whole thing was just, again, like I characterized it as a tragedy on my first reading. I think the setup of that conversation, and again, like, she allowed herself to get led into saying certain things that had an optically disastrous effect for her. I don't think it's either of their faults. I think neither of them were up to the task of the kind of care that conversation required, especially given the fact that there were personal stakes involved. She got onto Vosh's radar because she critiqued him directly. So, anyways, hopefully the stream doesn't die again. Sorry about that.
That's where my critique comes from. It's not
You
necessarily
can levy that on literally every content creator. I think every content creator thinks their shit don't stink to some level, you know?
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's not that it's not irrelevant. I think his content. Well, I have issues with Xander Hall, but let me just think of someone else who's like a leftist content creator who has like thousands of subs. Like, you know, it's not that it's not irrelevant, but I think people don't understand also the limitations of just having YouTube content at the same time, and that's more of what my comments on that are about.
Gotcha. I mean, yeah, like personally for me, I got into this because same as you, I want to vent. I like to talk about things that I care about, but I'm not really, I guess, trying to have a movement of any particular kind. I'm just here to just basically entertain, I think, you know, with some sort of political perspective. I guess, do you think it would be better if we if that approach was what other leftists took, instead of, like, you know, sometimes I do agree with you that people act like there's some big grand movement happening through this content creation.
I'm not really sure if I have like because I think at the end of the day, like, YouTube versus like organizing in person looks really different, because when you're organizing in person, I think the main thing is that you're reaching out to the community that's directly in front of you, and you're creating relationships in this community, and then you're like asking people to like be involved with like very specific things to like where you're living. And so it's a whole different set of things. So I think YouTube, you know, first and foremost is entertainment, and I think that's a curse and a blessing. So for me, I don't necessarily think it's wrong if YouTube is just entertaining and you're a leftist and you just kind of want to entertain. I think my biggest issue though is like when people say like I'm a leftist, and then I hear them saying really racist stuff, and I hear them saying stuff that's like anti-colonialist or that is colonialist, pro-colonialist, and that's where I'm like, listen, like it's one thing if you're like a right, or even just like a regular person who's like not really political saying this stuff, but when you're a leftist and you're spouting out this kind of rhetoric, that's where I'm like, this is really messed up, because we're supposed to like at the base level be like, this is messed up and this is what we're fighting against.
Gotcha. Okay, I think I'm ready to jump in. First of all, I want to ask you, do you think Hassan, do you know Hassan? Obviously, Hassan Abdi.
I actually don't know anything about Hassan, and like I'm good, because it's like it's just like it sounds like maybe like another debate bro that I would like.
Oh no, he's not.
Like,
he hates debates. He hates debates. He's a leftist.
What? Oh.
Yeah, he's a leftist. I just
don't know anything about Hassan.
Okay, that's okay. Then I'm not gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you if you think him buying his house was hypocritical, because like he just bought a fancy new house and he's a leftist, and like he's not really, I guess, like.
Why is he asking this? Like, what even is this? Do you know who Hassan is? No. Oh, I was just gonna ask you about it. Why are you asking Professor Flowers about Hassan's house? Get it together, man.
Community organizing. So, anyways, but you don't have to answer if you're not.
No, I did hear about that, and I do like wonder, because it's like for me, if I was ever like rich enough to own a home, like I would just, or own $1 million home, I'd want to redistribute the wealth or like put it into like put it into like community building or something like that. But yeah, maybe that's all I would like say about that. Is
Okay.
it just kind of like
I
makes me
agree with
raise
you.
an eyebrow?
I
But
agree with you.
yeah.
If Hassan hoarded that money and did nothing with it for his entire life, nobody would care. That's how stupid this is.
Um, okay. I guess next one I wanted to ask you is, so here's my perspective on things. Okay, again, I'm gonna try to be very gentle with this because I don't want to come off like some asshole or something. I'm genuinely telling you straight up. I'm not well read on these topics, but this is my perspective from my lived experience. Okay, I'm an immigrant living in Canada, and I moved here when I was 7 years old. Because of my upbringing and having.
My condolences. I think this is where I think this is where it begins. We're talking about Canada now, so we're talking about the land back movement and stuff like that. That's where I think this is going. Having grown up being raised in a family of Holocaust survivors, I've seen our narratives of oppression being used to justify some pretty awful ends, especially regarding Israel. Here's something else that bothers me. So, and this comes up in the context of denial of the Uyghur genocide as well. When we're talking about people who deny the, I'm going somewhere with this. When we're talking about people who deny the Uyghur genocide, we're not generally. It's genocide denial as a term has connotations and baggage that don't necessarily bear on the particular thing to which it's being deployed. So, when we're talking about a white nationalist who denies the Holocaust, we're talking about someone who denies something existed, not just out of skepticism, but out of spite for the victims. Or, potentially as well, out of a belief held for largely prejudicial, not evidential reasons, that the quote-unquote victims are, in fact, in some sense, the instigators, or it was a hoax or something. When we're talking about people who deny the Uyghur genocide, there's no hostility towards the Uyghur Muslims. It's based on a skepticism, possibly an absurd skepticism. Like, I think the Uyghur Muslims are undergoing, or suffering rather, what can be characterized as a genocide. Not on an order with the Holocaust in Germany, but it's bad. It definitely violates their human rights. And what the Chinese state is doing is bad. But I rely for that judgment on news information that I take on faith to a certain extent. And then other people don't take that on faith. There's not a malevolence in that reading on the part of those people who don't trust it. Similarly, when people characterize Professor Flowers as being genocide enabling, because in the context of the conversation, she wasn't coming down hard on limiting the activities of a what's the word I want to look for here, for a group that is engaging in a process of decolonization. And I want to review that again because I'm noticing a pattern here of Professor Flowers being really flustered and people talking past each other. And she condemned genocide later on and actually said, and I'm basically quoting her, that just because you're engaging in anti-colonial action doesn't mean that you can just do anything. So there was an explicit condemnation of genocide in that debate that people just aren't talking about, and it's really frustrating. When she is characterized as enabling genocide, that carries the baggage of she's now the black flavor of a Nazi, which she is not. I think the worst you could probably pin her on is that she doesn't have like a deep practical sense of how decolonization actually works politically. And I think that was brought out in the conversation. But I don't think it's incumbent on her to understand that, because I don't think that was her concern. I think she's concerned with the cultural element to this. But we'll, yeah. I think this is where it begins. I think this is where... Let's see, actually, if I look at the preview here, how far into this conversation is she? Oh, no, he goes right till... The video goes right till when she leaves. Okay, that's cool.
Having been an immigrant and lived in different places in the world, I have this view that, like, we're all just...
And while she says she condemns genocide... Okay, here we go. It's not denial. I'm talking about my family members using our experiences of genocide to justify the crimes against humanity in Israel. Oh, I see what you're saying. And while she says she condemns genocide, kicking civilian populations out of any region is ethnic cleansing according to the UN. Yes. Well, no, not kicking civilian populations. It has to be kicking civilian populations out by ethnicity. Yes, that would be ethnic cleansing. I don't need to valorize that. I think the point she was making is that the people who are motivated to do so, who are motivated to, or who are motivated to want to do so, rather, it's not an apt comparison to say that they're effectively like Nazis for wanting that. Again, for the principal reason that we're talking about people who grew up in an ambiance of, for myriad reasons, and maybe a lot of them are optical and illusory, but of an association between those people and a power structure that is slanted against them. Now, she actually doesn't, again, she says she doesn't like the idea of an ethno-state. She says that in the debate. So I don't think it's fair to characterize her as advocating for this, much less apologizing for it. The takeaway I got after having watched that like twice over now, and I'm going to watch it again, is that she really doesn't like characterizing people who end up in those extreme mental spaces as being malevolent or evil in the same way as a white nationalist is. They aren't. They're victims. It's like Aristotle pointed this out thousands of years ago. When you're unjust to someone, you make them more unjust as a result. You condition them to expect certain things from the world and to react in kind. So she doesn't leave ethnic cleansing off the table. She does kind of, though. Again, I think a lot of this comes down to she portrayed very poorly optically. If I didn't think she did, it'd be a different conversation. But I think she actually did take that off the table quite definitively. She said she doesn't like the idea of an ethno-state. It seemed to me like her principal objection to putting a limit onto the actions of a people trying to attain autonomy was simply that it wasn't the place of an outsider to set those limits. And I mean, like, it was kind of interesting in the conversation how, while I agree with the spirit of what Vosh was saying, there was something sneaking in with that. He was saying something to the effect of, like, well, yeah, we need to decolonize, but we need to maintain democratic structures and rights and things like that. Which is tricky, because on the one hand, yes, I'm ethically bound to prioritize those things. But on the other hand, those things themselves are a colonial holdover. They aren't things that emerged there from the will of the people. They're things that were imposed. And perversely, you end up in a situation where the good becomes the enemy of the just. Because all of these really, really good things are now being deployed to keep people in a position of deprivation. So it's messed up. And I mentioned this to Professor Flowers too in conversation, because this is my stance on this. I think it is perfectly valid, and I think it would be in concert with my own attitude, for in the event of a anti-colonial action resulting in genocidal activity, to then fight that with arms, if necessary, to put a stop to it. But you don't refer that to morality. You just do it, because that's attacking things that you value. And you have the guts to do that. I'm not saying I would have the guts. I'm saying if you're going to intervene as an act of will. Referring it to saying this is immoral from the position of somebody who has no power to affect the outcome whatsoever, and then folding your hands like you've won something. I think there's something perverse about that. She needs to say that kicking civilian populations from an area regardless of race is not defensible, full stop. The wavering was not okay. I mean, that complicates the things though, doesn't it? Like, let's think this through for a second. If Canada, say, goes to China with a bunch of soldiers. We do have those, believe it or not. Puts down the local defenses and then establishes a city there. Is it now rightfully ours because we've planted a civilian population there and let them live for a generation or two? Like when does when does the status of a land being stolen expire? And like open question, by the way. I'm not saying that there isn't an answer to this. It's not purely rhetorical. Or after how many generations are the descendants of a deprived people now obligated to respect the rights of the descendants of the occupiers to the land? Like, you see the problem? It's not that simple. Like, yeah, it may indeed be the case that kicking civilian populations from an area is not defensible. Okay, but is the thing that you're doing by disallowing that defensible too? You see the problem? And this is where it really becomes important to start paying attention to like the different experiences of different people, because now you're weighing things. You're weighing experiences to determine which one is worse. And if you're operating from the vantage of someone who isn't suffering the consequences or the full consequences of that state of affairs, then you're biased potentially in favor of an unjust outcome. I think that's the issue. Does that make sense? Like, the real life is messy. It's not a simple matter of just saying, these are the rules, and you follow them, or else you're the baddie. The baddies win, and sometimes the baddies win and put in good rules. And sometimes following good rules causes bad things. Like, it's a mess. I'm a former Yugoslav, and should make me uncomfortable, especially since I saw so many people adopt psychocultural baggage about perceived oppression to justify awful things. Yeah, I agree. And actually, this is one of the things that sold me on her quite a bit. She agreed too. If you watch the latter part of that debate with Vosh, she says very explicitly, in agreement with Vosh, who brings this up, yeah, even anti-colonialists can do very bad things. And she says, unprompted, just because you are oppressed and engaging in a process of decolonization doesn't mean you can just do everything. Hell, I'll bring it up. Let me find it. Let's add some clarity to this. Hang on. Just boop and doop. Vosh, Professor Flowers, debate.
And Stacy.
Here we go. Let's open this up. Okay, we'll try to find it. Yeah, we'll go through this really fast. I think it's in this section here.
On the equality of the vote, the ability to protect the rights of minorities is essential. So if you defer everything to the will of the population, you still leave room for, like horrible stuff to be done. And that's the only thing I'm saying. I'm just saying we shouldn't do ethnostates and we shouldn't do genocides. That's my my hot take, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, well, again, I think genocides are wrong, but I think for me, when I hear Black people talk about an ethno-state, I'm like, I can understand why you want to be away from your oppressors. And I think there's like ways that people can do it without like necessarily like hurting white people.
Yeah,
like there are places that are mostly Black anyways, and like if you just had certain spaces for Black people to be away from oppressed people,
like police, would you enforce it with state power, or do you just mean like a town that's mostly Black? Because I'm pretty sure those exist.
yeah, I don't know if it would be like anarchist or something like that. I don't know, because like anarchists probably wouldn't have a police. Like, I don't know, it's all very not realistic, because it's like not something that's gonna happen. I think my point is that I can understand why people are like, I don't want to live with people who have oppressed me anymore, and I think people need to be able to talk about that.
All I'm saying is that you can talk about that. I feel like I understand the feelings. It's just I can't get around the fact that they're identical to white nationalist arguments that I've heard. Because this is how it goes too, right? You talk about the abstracts of white nationalism, and they're like, well, yeah, I probably can't seize control of the U.S., so I'll just move over to what's a really white.
You get the point. There was another quote that I was looking for specifically, but she says it more or less there. She's not pro-genocide, and where was the actual quote? She said specifically. Hang on, let me see. Do we just want to finish this segment? We'll just finish that segment quickly. God damn it.
State, Idaho, I don't know. I'm going to move over to some all-white commune, and we're going to buy all the properties so there's no room for a black person to move in next door, and I just want to be rid of all the black crime or whatever. And hey, oppression, interpersonal oppression from white people to black people can suck, but crime can also suck. So we're all sort of acting out our harms, our traumas here. I just don't think that justifies like the formation of, you know what I mean? It's just, you can just go so many bad roads with that. TERFs do the same thing, right? TERFs want women's only spaces, by which they mean cisgender women's only spaces, because they've had a lifetime of hurt and violence and terror inflicted on them by people who have my body type. And for some reason, they think trans women have my body type, which they definitely don't. But it's one of the ways in which you can take hurt or harm and reflect it and essentially act the role of the oppressor in some tiny little pocket space you've created for yourself,
Sure, I think in those instances, that's exactly that. And I think there's like, I can really understand why Black people are tired of being around white people to the point where they would just like live in a place where there's not any white people because they experience so much racism. And
Well,
I think that's my point.
all right, well,
I think like where they're coming from in the
just
context really
don't
matters.
don't make any look. It has been over 3 hours, which is a pretty impressive run of time in any context. I just whenever you make your ethno city, whatever in America, just don't make any Sunday
I
jokes
like
for me, okay?
literally don't want to. You know what I'm saying?
I'm
Like
just
I'm
if
just
I drive
making a
through and
point about like being able to listen to people who are colonized, people who are oppressed, like give them space to talk about their pain instead of just, comparing them to Hitler. That's actually like the point of what I'm saying. It's like I'm not even saying you have to agree with separatists. I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying like try to understand their pain instead of just comparing them to Hitler or something.
Well,
Yeah, and somebody pointed this out in the chat as well. White supremacist reason for wanting that is so vastly different. Yeah, when you look at conversations, like what she is saying here, is she can understand. She actually says she doesn't want an ethno state, but she says she can understand why somebody would want to because they live in a world in which, to reword that in terms that seem clear to me at least, their everyday experience is filled with the perception that a particular group that surrounds them is the cause of, and actually this can be borne out by history to a certain extent, at the very least in terms of like the presence of that group in its configuration as it is, that is directly related to a tremendous deal of hardship and personal trauma and familial and historical trauma and all that other stuff. When you look at white nationalist discourse about this, it's surrounding stuff like they're angry at affirmative action and they think that black people are low IQ, and they think that it's the presence of non-whites is degenerative to culture. Like it's thoroughly evil stuff. Like we're not talking about the same kind of thing. We're not talking about people who are victims or who are victims of a longer history of actual victimhood. We're talking about people who are purely villains, typically comfortable middle class, lower middle class people who have basically all of the comforts of life at their disposal. Like for everybody who watched this debate and was like, red flags were going out, because she was giving sort of waffling responses to questions of like expulsion of people. These are practical questions that are outside of her wheelhouse. I don't actually fault her for that. I think her responses to that were born of naivety, not of malice. I think when you're talking about a white nationalist, however, it's different. I think there is a substantive difference. I think there's a level of practical ignorance in terms of how, because keep in mind, these are two radically different things. Like talking about like the phenomenology of like oppressive relations or things like that, or of racism. That's one thing. Talking about like how practically a decolonizing activity actually works, that's a massively complicated question. It far outstrips like my expertise. Like it far outstrips Vosh's, frankly. I mean, Vosh had to refer to liberal mores and norms and institutions throughout the entire conversation in order to establish that her position was, in some sense, immoral. That's a trap that a lot of very serious anti-colonial theorists and Marxist theorists and all these other people will be very attentive to, because he's effectively arresting a peculiarly European political form where it has been imposed by colonialism. So it's, like, basically the argument runs. You can engage in anti-colonial action provided you don't touch these colonial institutions, leave them there. Unfortunately, like, ethics is entirely culturally subjective, and there is no moral measure to make us feel good about the fact that we lose in the sky. It is possible for an evil group to win, and even have a just cause potentially in context, right? So when pressed to take her ideas to the limits, things got weird. I don't think she was taking her ideas to the limits. I think she was thinking through a lot of these things off the cuff. I don't think this is where she typically operates. Like, like if I were to waver on a question of genocide, you should be concerned. Because that's like an area where I should have like a firm stance and be unmovable. I think the terms were unclear going into this, and I think that she was working through this in real time. And I don't think she can be faulted for portraying poorly when she's frankly winging it in an area that's not her expertise. And I think she actually did fairly well when it actually came to like her area of competence. This wasn't a conversation that should have been had live like this, and it certainly shouldn't have been prefaced by antagonistic relations between the interlocutors. Whether she's pro-genocide is immaterial to me. I think her rhetoric is more harmful than she realizes. If misunderstood, potentially. That's definitely not impossible. I don't think so. I don't think she came off as badly as... well, I think this is probably gonna... I don't think this is gonna age as badly as it seems right now, but I think whatever harm could have been done was fairly neutered by the nature of the interaction itself, and again by the fact that she was batted down by somebody much larger than her. But I think whether she's pro-genocide is fairly material, and I think again she condemned genocide in the context of this conversation. If people choose to ignore that, then at the end of the day we're not talking about her rhetoric, we're talking about our rhetoric, because we're using clips out of context to say something different, right? The other thing that bugged me about her convo was her using Kenya as an example of decolonization. Kenya went through a lot of crap over 40 years. Again, that's a practical question. I think she's historically ignorant on these points. I think she had a limited set of cases to bring up, and she just wasn't prepared for that conversation, which is fine. The world's a big and very old place. There are a lot of things all of us don't know. And usually the people who do have an opinion on everything and an opinion on every place have that because they've sacrificed depth for scope. So they have an opinion on everything, but they understand jack. Or they don't understand jack, rather. So when you say, like, oh my god, she minimized and mangled Kenyan history, yes, she probably did, because she's not a historian. But what's the cutoff point for historical injustice? Atrocities by Bosnian Serbs in the 90s could have been perfectly justified in this viewpoint because they were oppressed under Ottoman control. So here's what I will say. Her bad presentation taken up, that could cause problems if it's taken up. I don't think it's actually swaying anybody towards an actual bigoted stance. But it could be. That's definitely plausible. That being said, like, we can't fault somebody for what they can't help. And in this context, I don't think she realized that she was underprepared for this engagement, and I don't think she realized it was going to go here anyways. So I just, like, let's not be unfair here. This is a hard situation. She is suddenly put before an audience of hundreds of thousands. I can't even fathom that. against somebody with a reputation for destroying his opponents in front of that audience of hundreds of thousands. There was a time in history when if this conversation took place in that context with that kind of audience, there'd be no record of it. Thucydides would be recreating it fictionally from reports. The only reason we're harder on her than we are on myriad other people is because we have the recording right in front of us and we can judge her as if, we know her intimately, which we don't. White nationalists are already capitalizing on her debate, and she didn't prepare any more in her discussion with him, which was friendly and lower stakes. I think I think after the debate with Vosh, maybe doing a tour of conversations was a bad call. Or at the very least, I think she should have been more careful. I think she's starting to be more careful. She recognized that it was a mistake, which is why she talked to me before our conversation tomorrow. Hell, it's distinctly possible she talks to me tonight and says, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this anymore, and that's fine. It would suck for me, but I mean, that's fine. But she doesn't shift anything in her discussion with Dr. Heem, so I don't buy the argument this is just her being off the cuff. Okay, well, let's watch the rest of the conversation with Dr. Heem. It's what we're here for, after all.
Citizens of the earth, and that anybody should have the right to live anywhere. And this is my general take. So I guess this is why I kind of invited you on to kind of hear your perspective on things.
Just gonna rewind that quickly. You said something about citizens of the earth. What the hell does that mean? There are no citizens of the earth. Citizenship is an invented concept.
Like put it into like community building or something like that. But yeah, maybe that's all I would like say about that. Okay. Is it just kind of like
I agree with you. I agree with you. Yeah, okay. I guess next one I wanted to ask you is, so here's my perspective on things. Okay, again, I'm going to try to be very gentle with this because I don't want to come off like some asshole or something. I'm genuinely telling you straight up, I'm not well read on these topics, but this is my perspective from my lived experience. Okay, I'm an immigrant living in Canada, and I moved here when I was 7 years old. Because of my upbringing and having been an immigrant and lived in different places in the world, I have this view that like we're all just citizens of the earth, and that anybody should have the right to live anywhere. And this is my general take. So I guess this is why I kind of invited you on to kind of hear your perspective on things. Like, for example, how would someone like me fall into this concept of colonizer versus colonized? We can start there, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's like someone like you falling into the example of colonizer versus colonized. Yeah, I'm not really sure how to like answer that. I think more of what I'm getting at is that, especially in America and the U.S. and also in Canada as well.
He's baiting something with this. This is sleazy. So what's going to happen? What he was hoping for is she's going to say something like, "Well, you're taking part in colonial processes to move here and live in buildings that were established over native land and use goods acquired by colonialism, yada yada yada. So you, a non-white person, are actually a colonizer, and now we're going to, it's the left eating its own kind of thing." This is just, again, like there was no motive for this question except for that. I'm not liking this guy, guys.
The Indigenous people there have never stopped fighting for their land back. I think there's this kind of way that we talk about, and I think also I want to mention, like I mentioned Africa, and I like use a lot of examples of decolonization there that aren't really as relevant because Africans aren't trying to, gain their power back or like gain their power back by removing the colonizers at this point. They're dealing with the economic legacies of colonialism more so. But when you look at, the U.S. and Canada, we kind of talk about it as if colonization happened, as if it's this thing that's like in the past. And to the Indigenous people there, it never stopped happening. And it's, for me, understanding that was very pivotal because they've never stopped fighting for their land, and they've been slighted. And we need to ask them what they think that we should do about these colonial situations. Like in the U.S., there's land back, and it focuses not even on all the lands of America, but like there's certain places there's like a focus on, like Mount Rushmore, and giving that back. For example, it's a sacred site, and I think this stuff comes down to asking them what they want to be done.
Okay, so I guess my this is my thought process anyways, like that we should address 100%. We should hear out the Indigenous people, hear out their gripes, you know, like they're obviously in a lot of places in Canada, for example, they don't have clean drinking water, and that should be taken care of. I guess it's just like a lot of it seems like systemic issues, which I, as a progressive, agree with you should be addressed. And then the rest of it falls to like I guess like I don't really know how all these other the thing is I just don't know how colonizer and colonized analysis works in today's day and age when you have so much individual movement of people. There's so much that has, like, before, back in the day when people colonized.
Okay, so here's how you understand it. There are spheres, right? There's the native population in its territory, which is divided off and cut off from the benefits of the colonial polis or whatever. And then there is that colonial polis itself. And you end up with basically a politics of indifference and exploitation. So it's not at the level of the individual. You don't. It's pointless to talk about an individual as a colonizer for the simple reason that the colonizer is the European state that sets up the colony. The the individual is just a colonist. They're just a person sent over to occupy a station. They're an extension of the state, right? So the actual colonialism takes place at the level of the community. It's one community using its material power to deprive another community. And that's why the divisions principally happen at the level of the community. They're felt by the individual, but that's not like the actual site of colonization. That's why decolonization rhetoric often involves things like institutions and culture and stuff like that, and not specifically attitudes of individuals or behaviors of individuals. I wonder who she's consulted with on Indigenous issues and which Indigenous thinkers inform her views genuinely. I don't think that's not a fair gotcha, because he asked her a question about it in the moment, like when's she going to do this? And she probably has read one or two things, like I have, by the way. We actually have I don't know if renown's probably the word for it, but we have some interesting, we have an entire Department of Indigenous Governance at the University of Victoria where I go. Tayaki Alfred teaches there. Like, in any case, what she's talking about is hardly controversial. Oh, Lanta's Métis citizenship. Interesting. I didn't know that.
It used to be like you would come over, a massive group of people would come over and like set up shop, whatever, but now you have all this like autonomy of families, of individuals to live anywhere they want. So I feel like there's all this gray area.
That's not a distinction. Families could choose to become colonists. Even indentured laborers often chose to become indentured. They signed contracts to offset debt or whatever. I think I'm going to double check that actually. I'm not entirely certain how they acquired indentured labor. All I know is I'm probably descended from it. But yeah, again, like the issue is not in the individual motives of families. It's not like people are cackling together like we will go to America and we will steal the natives' land. It's like no, they saw ads saying, hey, farmland in the New World. They sailed over. They set up shop, and then individuals, by the way, would often like steal natives' land by themselves, often against the British state's laws. But again, like it comes back to this question: like at what stage does stolen land stop being stolen? Like if I get like a goon squad together, and I bulldoze a graveyard and I set up a shopping mall on top of it, does that stop being a wrong because that shop has now been owned by my descendants for 2 generations over? Or do they not still owe that back? Right? Like it's... And I'm... that sounds like a joke. Just nearby my place, actually, it was a big deal a few years ago. There was an indigenous burial site that was a very important religious space. It was a set of caves that contained human remains, and it was important culturally, and it was deemed to not be a religious site because it didn't have any buildings on it, because it basically didn't have a European style church over it. It was okay to demolish a graveyard. So is it now a moral wrong to reclaim that 100 years from now? Like, they blasted it with dynamite. Gravesite. Massively important place to lots of people who we'll never know the names of. Like, it's... Would it be right to say that colonialism has the same impact as white supremacy, and that neither necessarily need a colonizer nor a white person to be material? To an extent. I mean, yes. Colonialism has like a similarly infectious cultural element to it. In fact, that tends to be more or less what we're referring to, because we're not so much colonizing anymore because the colonies are all established. So it's now literally just, the... I mean, look, like, what are we saying when we say that colonialism ended? Are we saying that the colonies left? No. No, the colonies didn't leave. They just grew into their own states. How's that better? Like, you see how it doesn't make sense if you think about it for just a few seconds. It didn't end. It just got so bad that now it's good, apparently. Anyways.
Area in the middle that kind of makes it hard to analyze it from your perspective, no?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of gray area. I think the thing that I'm getting at is that white people still directly benefit off of colonialism. And, Vosh made the argument that we all do, but also at the same time, like, other people who are non-white are still oppressed by racism, which is a result of colonialism. I think
but both of those can happen at the same time, right? You can have everybody's lives improving, but there's still, like, it used to be like that here, and now it's here, but there's still a set gap between those two.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
So
we should address. So I guess what I'm saying is we should, like, address. Vosh, you, and me would probably, all three of us, agree that, like, systemic issues need to be addressed for Indigenous people, for Black people, and, like, on those specific solutions, we'll probably have a lot of agreement. I guess this whole idea of, like, victimizing white people or victimizing the colonizer is what I don't know if I don't know what benefit that serves, I guess. Like,
victimizing the colonizer. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I'm an immigrant, right? When I hear, like, that Indigenous people should have self-determination of their land, this used to be their land, I feel as though I'm not welcomed here. And I don't really like that. Like, I feel like I'm, I participate.
Okay, so the land back movement literally has nothing to do with the Indigenous bans. So this is a common misperception, and it's stupid. First of all, as has been pointed out by a lot of people, not necessarily benign people, but truthfully nonetheless, Indigenous concepts of land ownership are not equivalent to those of the European state. So the land back movement is not about appropriating the state apparatus for Indigenous bands. It's not about now saying Indigenous bands now own Canada, get out whitey. That's literally not a factor. It typically has to do with contentions over natural resources and traditional territories, which are typically not, again, because of massively different modes of production, they're typically not the traditional territories are typically not where modern Canadian cities are located. So that's not even a question here. It's typically like who has control over land that a pipeline is going through, or who has control over a mine, or who has control over who gets to operate the police in this, like, reservation area, stuff like that. Do we have a right to clean water? That was brought up earlier. The Indigenous population in Canada is not large enough or powerful enough to run a state, much less take it over. So that's preposterous. What does he mean by agreeing on systemic issues, though? Flowers would describe colonial structures as systemic. Oh, they are systemic. They're the colonial structures are the system. Like it's the European state form is ubiquitous globally. It's there's no system without it. I highly recommend watching the discussion with Lance. I might do that tomorrow. We'll see.
I contribute to society. So that's kind of what I mean. Like, why can't we just help to address the current systemic issues without saying that, like, oh no, this is our land, kind of.
Well, it's not your land.
Why though?
So it's
Why,
like,
but like, why can't it? Why
because
can't,
it's never.
So here's a hard pill to swallow. In practical terms, it's no one's land. It's whoever can grab it, because there's nothing written in the sky that says this is your land. What you can say, however, is that in the process of acquiring this land in the way that you have, you've violated the principles by which you legitimize yourself. That's the perversity of it, is that the liberal state became illiberal by obtaining itself in on this continent. So that's where the rebuke would take place. It was an act of supreme hypocrisy and cruelty against its own avowed spirit. Now, when Heem is saying, like, well, I contribute to society, what do you mean by that? Because Indigenous bands didn't choose to be a part of the state. That was imposed upon them. It's not their state. And we're talking about separate nations, ostensibly. We're not talking about different citizens who are like, well, I have rights too because I contribute to... Like if if Germany took over Britain during World War II, and then it gained its autonomy again in the future, would, like, I don't know, not gained its autonomy, if it then, like, separated after the fact as, like, a German colony turned state, would, like, a Nazi be able to say something like, well, I contribute to society, therefore I have a right to be here regardless? No. Rights are contextualized to the community. Rights are not something in nature, unless we're talking about natural rights, which are really just signifying the absence of sort of negative rights, or is that the correct terminology? The absence of impediments. Because the society in question is not that of the Indigenous bands. That's a society they interface with, but it's not their society. Now, in actual fact, practically, it is their society. That's why there's an Indigenous sovereignty movement to establish that, or to reestablish that, or something. But they're talking past each other, so. That's the upshot of this. They're talking past each other. Flowers has trouble with her delivery. Like, there's no way around that, but her position here is, like, inarguably more sophisticated. Heem's argument is effectively that, well, what it boils down to is he feels that he's good enough to be there. And maybe, like, not that that's really required, but that's not an argument against what she's saying. The point is that the land was stolen. Now, it may be the case that stolen land may nonetheless be kept. Practically, that seems to be the case. But, you know, it's still stolen. I know I'm nitpicking, but how does she account for members of the local population who were complicit in colonialism in exchange for power? I don't know how she accounts for that. This is the thing. When we're talking about questions of sovereignty and autonomy and sovereignty are absolute. You can't put limits on it. At that level, you're talking about questions of will and preference. So, like, to say that an autonomous body cannot commit genocide is factually incorrect. Now, if you want to say they cannot commit genocide morally, sure, but what does that mean? Who told you that? Did God tell you that? Like, I'm against genocide. Can I say that that's absolutely written in the stars as a bad thing? I don't see it anywhere. Like, you see the problem? That's the world we're in. Like, there's no like big 10 commandments in the sky saying these are the political actions you shall not engage in. They just don't exist. I hate them. But at the end of the day, if I'm being really honest, that's all I'm saying by that. Hate those actions, to be clear. The ideology is very much still for decolonization, helping indigenous people through further self-determination for the nations, returning various lands to them, none of which are yeah, exactly. So when like the land back movement has nothing to do with natives stealing cities from white people. They enjoy shopping malls and restaurants as much as everybody else, as has been pointed out.
Never stopped being stolen, and I think it's just kind of as simple as that. That these people's land has been stolen from them. There's been multiple treaties broken that shouldn't even happen in the first place about these people's land that was always theirs, and it's never stopped being their land. It's never stopped being stolen. So
History wasn't fair. Why should the future be? Because we prefer it to be fair and we can make it so. Why wouldn't we, right? Well, I mean, there are answers to that. Why wouldn't we? One of the reasons is that we like the unfairness. We like what it gets us. It doesn't sit well as an explanation, does it? I think Heem's response highlights why Flowers is adamant on trying to have honest conversations about these topics take place. Yeah. No, I think she's wise to be careful about who she talks to from now on. I don't think she's not stupid. She's a smart person, but I don't think debates are her thing. I'm gonna get some water. I'm gonna be right back. Alright, I'm back. Sorry about that. We'll keep going. Oh, and we'll get my better looking face out of the way.
I think the point is like, I don't think people who want their land back are going to kick people out. First off, I don't even think that's something that they're discussing. But I think people need to understand is that they would have every right to discuss that because it's their land.
Okay. I mean, okay. So I guess when you say their land, do you think that just like anyone who comes and finds a piece of land first, it's theirs for the rest of time?
No, I don't think that's how land works. But I also
No, but the fact that just occupying a territory first doesn't establish that as yours into perpetuity that doesn't mean that it's therefore okay to steal it, right? I hate this argument. Like it reduces what were in fact, in some cases, land appropriation by massacre and actual, like, blunt theft. Or otherwise by scamming the locals. Then you say, well, you know, I bet at some point in the past, their ancestors did the same thing, maybe. Or, you know, like, people move around all over the world. Maybe it, you know, why should the fact that they were here first mean that it's just theirs, right? What is this in service of? You're arguing that it is okay to take someone's land on which they have lived for generations, on which they have buried their ancestors for generations, around which they have deep, existentially relevant religious beliefs. It's okay to take that because, you know, that's just how the world works. First of all, it's not how the world works because the colonists were Christian in the first place, which meant that, yeah, love your neighbor as yourself. No, you weren't. You didn't care about that. You saw gold.
So think that in the context of colonialism, in the context of massacring, you know, millions of indigenous people, this is the. I'm not gonna like sit here and be like, this is like.
Why though? Why can't it be? Why,
we all have.
Why can't it be everyone's? Why can't it be everyone's? Why can't we all prosper and live wonderfully side by side?
Suppose I come to your house. I break down your door. I steal your food. I relegate you to the second, to some bedroom in the back, the guest room, and I lock you in there. And then when you start banging on the door, I go, hey, why can't this just be everyone's? And I invite all my friends over. A few days pass by. Hey, look, we've been here for a long time too. It's basically just as much ours now. You guys are being the selfish ones. Oh, you don't have any running water? Too bad. Like, it's perverse.
Like, because it was stolen?
Okay, but like, now it's everybody's.
And okay, well,
It's stolen, but it's okay, because now it's everybody's. We gave it to them. By the way, even if it's everybody's, indigenous communities are, by and large, massively deprived. Their territories are not respected in terms of the quality of the environment. We run pipelines and... Actually, there's a documentary. What is it called again? There's a documentary about nuclear power, and it's shown in a lot of schools here. There was a nuclear power plant or something that had bled into the local water supply and had killed, or had caused like a rampant cancer in an indigenous community, things like that, or just a lack of clean water. Like, they're not given the stuff that we expect our citizens to be given. Guns, Germs, and Steel? Oh, I see how you spelled steel. That's clever. Terrible book. Terrible.
I guess we just don't really know what to say there. I'm just not going to sit here and be like, oh, like, everyone has, like, just as much right to this land as indigenous people.
Oh, okay. All right, I guess that would be where we agree to disagree. Like, I don't think anyone has any particular right to a piece of land over anyone else. Like, I think that, like I said, as someone who lived...
So, like,
yeah.
Do you think it's okay, though, then, if that's
as someone who benefited from being able to buy their way into the territory, presumably, you think it's okay for the indigenous population to have been deprived of that territory. Keeping in mind, we're not talking about like in the case of white nationalists who are like, ugh, the brown people are here, ugh, they're ruining our traditional... No, we're talking about territories that were actually stolen, that natives were not allowed access to, about resources that were redirected to cities, to the deprivation of native groups, often to the poisoning of the resources they relied upon. Following a long history of being scammed and even massacred. Like, these aren't comparable. DrHeem's feelings do not matter, I'm sorry to say. No one's feelings matter, practically. Like, at the end of the day, like, what is done is done. But if we're going to make the pretense of talking about rights and morals and things like that, there's no claim whatsoever to being able to be here. Like, yes, it would be lovely if nobody had to move and everything just sort of fixed itself. But I don't have a right to be here. I have a right as a member of the state to be protected by the state in my sitting here, yes. But like with respect to the state, but in absolute terms, I have no right to be here. There's no right to be here. There's no right about any of this. I've got books on my shelf made of animals. I have as much right as they do to be here.
That's the case, then do you think that colonialism is okay?
I mean,
do you think it's okay to just like come in and take away people's land if everyone has
what do you mean?
Right?
What do you mean by okay? I guess that's the question. Is it like morally the right thing to do? Probably not. But is it something that happened?
But if it happened, it just happened, and so we're just gonna like live with it. We're just gonna like live with colonialism.
Well, the thing is,
we're not gonna like try to like rectify any of those mistakes.
Yeah, we can rectify them by addressing the systemic issues, right?
Well,
yeah, by optimizing the colonial state. But you're assiduously not fixing the issue. It's like here's a colorful analogy. It's like you're in the act of murdering someone. They're like, but it hurts, and you're like, oh, okay, well here, where can I stab you where it's gonna hurt less, right? Because the individual may prosper under colonialism, but the community can still suffer. The community can still be killed. A lot of them are undergoing extinction, effectively. Land back is about honoring pre-existing agreements. If Flowers had focused on that, I'd have no issue with the rhetoric. Yeah. Good point where the land back thing. I don't think she like has an intimate knowledge of this, and I don't think it's incumbent on her to do so. She's not in this country. But how does this figure in the Hegelian view of right? In what sense? A treaties? Well, there is an ethical spirit that's downstream from the European colonial society that is blatantly violated in the activity we took part in during colonialism, during the early parts of colonialism, I should say. That's why in fact, the history of human rights doctrine comes from men like Vittoria in Spain, priest, also very well-known political theorist, who were critical of the conquistadors for going against Christian belief in their treatment of the natives of America. Nomos of the Earth actually goes into that quite a bit. Leave it to a Nazi to get colonialism right.
the systemic issue, part of that is giving them their land back.
Okay, well, but this land is for I just don't know what happens to the people that were born here, for example, or that
Well,
were
I think you should ask the indigenous people, because I don't think they're saying that they're going to kick any of us out.
Okay.
Neither of these people have expertise in this issue. I mean, I don't, but I know for a certainty that the question has never been about who gets to live in Canada or the United States. The question is about who gets control and rights over territory that was agreed upon between the European state and the native bands. Who gets to profit from this mine? Who gets control over what gets run through this marsh or this river or this field or what have you? It has never been a question of whether or not Quebec will be vacated of white people or of immigrants or what have you. So they're both sort of just onboarding the idea that this is a question of Indigenous groups basically getting to occupy the state. That's not a question. First of all, because they're not stupid and they know they can't. But secondly, because they wouldn't actually be engaging in decolonization that way. They would simply be taking over the colonial state.
I guess I guess I'm just like a little confused. Do you see why I'm saying that it's kind of like victimization of one group of people while in trying to help one group of people, you're victimizing another group of people?
I think it's like so hard for people to understand like the atrocities that have happened to Indigenous people, and so like talking about like giving them their own land that's theirs back to them is bewildering to people because there's people living here, and
Yeah,
it's just like blowing their mind.
It is. It's blowing my mind. I don't know what I would do.
I think it just speaks to like how little people have talked about colonialism, or like how like little of interest like people have been in understanding like the fight that Indigenous people have for their land back.
The thing is, I can appreciate the fight. I just don't know what the thing is. Again, I just don't think the dichotomy of colonizer and colonized applies to today's analysis of the world. Like, there's so much movement. There's so much interracial relationships. What do you do if you're half Indigenous, half white? What do you do if you're half white, half black? You know, like all of these things make it so that these kind of the dichotomy, I think, doesn't necessarily apply anymore. That's why it's like, okay, so what? They were colonized like, I don't know, 200, 300, 400, 500, whatever, 100 years ago. But what are we gonna do now to improve things, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that dichotomy necessarily exists, as you're saying. There's like, you know, different people are mixed and so on. People are moving around. But I think at the very least, like there are still tribes who are like very clearly like existing and fighting for their land back. I think at the very least, we need to ask them, what do you want to do? This has always been your land. Obviously, there's people who are living here. What do you think we should do? And, you know, I obviously need to research this more, but from what I understand, people aren't literally saying that we're going to kick every person out of America. People just want like these certain territories back. People want these certain places back. And then people want to actually own that land, not have to pay taxes to the American government, but just have it be theirs. You know, the conversation about like kicking people out.
By the way, the passport system was invented to keep people like DrHeemedOut out. I have a video on that. It's the Con of the Nation stage. Give it a look. It's really important. Or the book it primarily uses is really important. My video simplifies it. The Indigenous responses to Black resistance video is fascinating. That does sound fascinating. I'll give that a look. The Canadian Scholar Strike. Canada is a super interesting place, not because Canada itself is interesting, but because of its role historically. And its role historically is one of the reasons why it's typically ignored. But it's actually, this is like the border petri dish of the world. So much of how we conceive of the modern nation state, of borders and of ethnic identity and things like that, and of like citizens' rights, it happened here. Unfortunately. In fact, when I say here, I mean like here specifically. British Columbia, where I am right now.
Is just not what's happening. And also, there's an issue specifically of white people still benefiting off of colonialism. Even if they're immigrants from Europe in the past 3 generations, they're still benefiting directly from the effects of colonialism. So,
what benefit are you referring to? Sorry, can I ask what benefit you're referring to specifically?
The benefits of white supremacy.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
So what about like a black person from England moving here?
I don't necessarily think that they're like necessarily colonizers and that they're benefiting from colonialism. And when I say like colonizers, that's what I'm talking about, is people being able to reap the direct benefits of colonialism. But at the same time, if you asked Indigenous people, like, what do they think about someone like a Black person moving from the UK or things like that? Again, I don't think they would want to kick that person out or even kick the white people out necessarily. But I think it comes down to this being their land and asking, what should we do with this? And again, they're not really talking about kicking anyone out. But I think at the end of the day, like, even me as a Black person living here, I wonder, like, I still would like to ask Indigenous people, like, what do you think about me being here? And not even just think about it.
Yeah, like listen, you were born in North America, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so don't you feel like North America is your home?
Sure. But it's at the end of the day, like, we're talking about like years and years of just massacring the entire population for their land.
I get that, but you're just one person. Like, you just want to live a life, like, you know, like, I don't know, how can you be blamed for that?
I mean, you can't be blamed for it, but so what? That's what it boils down to. Which is not to be callous, because I am personally oriented very much against anti-colonial action if it results in the destruction of a bunch of innocent people. But that's me talking. That's me saying that rubs against my preferences to such an extent that, in context, at least if it was near enough, I would physically fight against it. But what's he referring to here? Like, what by what standard would he condemn that himself? Like, he's trying to refer outside of himself, right? When we're talking about morality, we're talking about something else. If we're talking about in the context of a community that's not at civil war, sure, that makes sense. But when we're talking about indigenous nations, actually, we're not talking about citizens. We're talking about another community, or at least another community in prospect. Did we lose the connection again? My bar went red for a sec. I wish she had taken time to research and discuss specifics of her worldview. Heeman's demonstrating his ignorance for sure, but she doesn't go beyond a surface analysis. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I wouldn't say she's not going beyond a surface analysis, but, you know, her presentation does leave something to be desired. Again, though, somebody said that it's not Heem's style to bait people. These are baiting questions. I'm sorry, and it's everyone's style who wants to grow in this platform to bait people. He's not having a conversation with someone who's practically only known for fighting with Vosh and being called a Nazi on stream, because he's looking for a quiet, cozy meeting of minds, right? He said he isn't well read on these issues. I think a lot of people not engaged with this topic would approach this convo with similar views as him. He may not be read on these issues avowedly, but he came with arguments. Like, I feel like this is my home. Why shouldn't I be able to be here? Do you think that land just indefinitely belongs to a people because they were here first? These are fighting words, as they say. I know this is short-sighted, but I just see this identity politics, and it increasingly makes my stomach turn. All politics is identity politics. The word political comes from the word for a wall. Polis, fortress. Literally. Us, them. Yes, P.S. He is not trying to understand her. He's trying to catch her out. Yeah. He's fishing for gotchas, because this conversation hasn't been organic. He has a list. He has a list of things, and he's moving along the list as controversy doesn't appear on earlier parts. If she responds in a way that is sort of, you know, pleasing to a general audience, he moves on. If there's a fight, oh.
It's not about blame. It's about rectifying the mistakes that have, not even mistakes, just the atrocities that have happened.
How can you
Sucks to be born?
Yeah, I get. How can you rectify it though? Like, what can you do besides advocate for things that will improve systemic racism?
We can stand by Indigenous people for starters,
Sure.
and then hear what they have to say.
Yeah,
and that's really the point that I'm getting at. Because like, I'm not even saying that we should all, that the Indigenous people should just kick all of us out. It's not really something that I'm advocating for.
I get that. Yeah,
I'm
You've made
advocating
that
for.
pretty clear, I guess. But it's just. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know. Lots of people think that I want to white genocide.
Well, the
so
reason
I think
it is. I think the reason that it's kind of unclear is because while you explicitly say I don't want to do this, some of the conclusions of your analysis might lead to that. I guess it doesn't at least close the door to that kind of.
Yeah.
So,
let me explain that.
Yeah,
because,
if you can clarify anything you want.
Yeah, I saw this tweet that pretty much just broke down the position I was in. So I'm just gonna like pretty much.
Oh, hello.
Like copy and paste that, but it's by a communist who pointed this out. And so, can you hear me?
Yeah, your audio is weird. It's good for like 3 minutes in a row, and then for 10 seconds, it's like beep, 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 you're roboting. But I think it's your internet might be an internet thing, but it's okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, hang on 1 second. Now you're. Wait, 1 sec. Say something. Testing.
Hello.
Okay. One more time.
Talking. Da-da-da.
Okay, we're good.
Blah blah blah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Vash is arguing the fear of retribution argument, which is that we can't give Indigenous people their full autonomy because they might pull a genocide. And so I wasn't about to like buy in to that argument because it's like classically racist argument. So I was like arguing that we should give Indigenous people their full autonomy back. And so he's like, well, what if they pull a genocide? And so if you say, well, they can't pull a genocide, then there's the question of asking who's telling them that they can't, because the whole issue is that people have not allowed them to have their full autonomy. So instead I say genocide's wrong and it's not really something that they're going to do. But at the end of the day, we need to give them their full autonomy back.
So why?
So I don't know if that helps clarify.
Sorry, 1 sec. First of all, your camera's a little out of focus now. Do you maybe just need to move back and front? Come close.
Me, I'll put my hand in front of it.
Nope.
No?
No, it was doing so good before. Now it's just fully
I can
blurry.
try switching it over. Is it going to be on a video?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just turn it.
That's weird. It was so good before.
Yeah, it's the zoom. The
Oh,
focus.
now we're
Is
good.
it good.
Yeah, now we're good.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So this is the thing I wanted to ask you is like you say we should advocate for the autonomy of people, right? And I'm 100% for that, but I would just say that the autonomy should be on an individual basis. Why group people and say like that black people need to have autonomy or white people? Why not just say
individuals can't have full autonomy? That's actually impossible. Individuals can't have full autonomy. When we're talking about autonomy, like, it literally means self-law. Nomi literally refers to a division of land. That's what nomos refers to initially. Autonomy means that you have jurisdiction over yourself within your space, but we're talking about a division of space, a division of individuals, the thing that constitutes the individuals. Individuals can have rights, they don't have autonomy. Peoples can have autonomy. States can have autonomy. States are defined by having autonomy. Anyways, we'll keep going.
say everyone should have autonomy and be able to do whatever they want, live wherever they want, and be free from systemic, oppression, right? Isn't that so much better than like specifically saying no, black people need to have an autonomy? Well, like it sounds like you're saying that they're all
people,
yeah.
Well, because these people are a group, and as a group, they haven't been able to have their autonomy.
I guess
like Indigenous people have not been able to get their land. For example, Indigenous people still can't, have their own kind of laws and systems that are super limited because they're super limited because at the end of the day, like they still have to like answer to like the U.S. government. Like they've never been able to have their full autonomy as a group.
Well, every
since
U.S.
COVID.
citizen has to respond to the U.S.
My
government.
point is like there is like laws and like I should have read up on this before mentioning it, so I'm gonna have to be super vague so I don't misspeak. But like Indigenous people are supposed to be able to like practice like their own law, and so there's like certain laws that they can practice, but it's very constraining and super limited, and it ends up allowing more crime to happen. Unfortunately, and I'm not explaining this very clearly because I am forgetting what the exact laws are. And so there's like all these issues with like trying to give Indigenous people like some of their autonomy, but like they don't really have all of it.
Okay.
And that's what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
And it's as a group of people. It's not this isn't like a group. This isn't an issue of individuals. This is specifically an issue of a group.
I guess I just yeah, I mean I think that you can say that the group is experiencing systemic systemic violence, systemic issues that can be addressed systemically, and then you say that individuals should have the autonomy. Like I don't know if I like this idea that like one group of people can make a determination for another group of people. Isn't that, I don't know, is that the kind of
then
right?
I think maybe we're on the same page then, which is why I'm talking about like anti-colonialism, giving a group of people their own autonomy back and their own power back.
Okay. I guess okay. So one other thing I want to ask you. I guess it's kind of related. Do you?
They're not on the same page. So going back to the party analogy, he's basically saying that hey, we booted you into the back room and we invited all of our friends. Therefore, you have the right to your own home, but equivalent to the friends that I've invited. And like, is the fact that the friend that was invited only came on the invitation of the person who booted you from your own home, does that therefore mean that that friend has a right to be there? It's like, no. This is just silly. And it's making, again, like it relies on reference to norms and institutions that are specifically colonial in origin, which makes this like it's he just doesn't know what he's talking about. That's the frustrating thing. This is, by the way, why I hate STEM people who try to weigh in on politics, because they think because of like they're educated, but they think they therefore have the tools for this kind of engagement. They really don't. I don't think Heem or Professor Flowers is equipped to have this discussion. They're basically speaking different languages. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, honestly, I think Professor Flowers wisened up to this, which is why she's not engaging these debates anymore. Or at least that's what she told me. If that's the case, she's smart. Because, frankly, these are really hard debates to have, even when you are prepared. And you need to choose your interlocutors very carefully, even if you are super prepared for it, because the stakes are high. I have a lot of respect for people in STEM. I just hate how there's a culture in STEM of, there's this idea that the liberal arts are kind of soft and gay, and they're kind of right, but they're still a different area of expertise. And you don't just absorb that through osmosis. It takes work and focus. And a lot of people in STEM and in economics and places like that, they don't do the work to actually understand this stuff, and they think that they can just kind of wing it, and they can't.
Do you think that the issue is like white people, or do you think that the issue is colonizers?
I think it's an issue of both. I think that white people benefit off of colonialism, and until white people take a stance against colonialism, against white supremacy, against racism, then they will continue to be a part of the problem.
I 100% agree that white supremacy is an issue.
Are we working? I think we're working again. I think we're working again. Are we back? I don't know what the hell happened there. We're back. Look, even Vosh's stream dies. I don't know what the hell's wrong with YouTube. This is ridiculous. Actually, I wonder, because he's on Hippy Dippy right now, I wonder if there was like a site-wide outage. That'd be interesting to see. Let's see. Anyways, now that I've lost 10 of you, let's try and finish this.
White supremacy in terms of, you know, white people like thinking, oh, this guy's a Muslim, whatever, da da da. So I experienced a lot of the same, like, similar oppression under white supremacy. So I 100% agree with that. But like at the same time, under your analysis, I am not welcome here necessarily. This is, I can't call this place home, I guess, or whatever. Like it's
I'm not even saying that you can't call this place home.
there would be any disagreement with Vosh or with me